Alright, hey, this is Ramon, Channels Alpha 4. This is a test run of my new setup for my videos. I'm going to try to keep it down to 30 minutes. Let's see how we do. Alright. So, and the reason why I'm doing this is because when I did my original videos, A, I wasn't as comfortable on camera, and B, I didn't have as many resources as I do now. Now it's been 2 years. Figure I'd try this again. I know I have a small audience, but hey, you guys are worth it. All right. Genesis, the beginning to the fall, line by line. There are two main sources for the first 3 chapters of Genesis. In source criticism, these authors are referred to as P and J. The first chapter is mostly that of P, and the second chapter is mostly that of J, while the third chapter is a blending of these two. Yet throughout all of Genesis, these sources are interwoven together, and the story that they are telling is incomplete without the other. There are other sources for the Bible as well, but they come in later, after our subject here today. Yet J and P form the framework of what we understand as Genesis today. Going into this tale, you should understand that it establishes a natural dichotomy to creation. And any cursory reading of Genesis, especially from a secular or literary viewpoint, will lead you to some quick and easy conclusions that if you are a literalist or a fundamentalist, you should familiarize yourself with and grow comfortable discussing, especially if you don't want to scare off the non-religious types. Namely, that the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and it could be argued that most of Genesis in total, is a story about the beginnings of primeval societies, that it is the struggle between the civilized versus uncivilized states of being and existence, and that can be understood as hunter-gatherer versus agrarian society. It could be understood as the pre-rational man versus the rational man, or as the rural versus the urban, just to name a few examples. But it is also important to point out to the atheistic and secular critics who might be watching this video that most of Genesis, especially the first 3 chapters, are polemic. And it's a polemic against the larger, more popular pagan and heathen religions of the day at that time. And for more on that, at the end of this redo of the first 3 chapters of Genesis, I will be reading from the Emma Elish and from Theogony and Working Days, because they kind of coincide the most. I will not be doing the Atar Hasis, because the Atar Hasis is more like about Noah. And I won't be doing lines from the Epic of Gilgamesh, because those are very cursory and very tangential connections. All right. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1. The first day. Light and darkness separate. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. The KJV version is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, while the Jewish Hebrew version is when God began to create heaven and earth. The earth was a formless wasteland, and darkness covered the abyss, while a mighty wind swept over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw how good the light was. God then separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Thus evening came, and morning followed, the first day. An interesting question to ponder, to begin with, is what was light before the existence of the sun? God in Genesis is in the plural, Trinity. There is a symmetry to creation, an order to that which is made by God. The traditional Christian opening differs from the traditional Hebrew syntax of clauses. You will notice that's why I read 3 different versions. And the pre-creation then begins either ex nihilo, or from chaos, or from the abyss, or out of the black water, depending on how you translate the Hebrew into English, or into whatever your native language is. Creation could be seen as the organization of chaos into order. It could be that process. And the Spirit, or breath of God, or Holy Spirit, as we would understand it in Christianity, would be the wind that sweeps over the water. The word could be understood as logos, and logos is Jesus. Space, then, is seen as the great pre-primordial sea, the dark waters. And though the theological basis for these ideas come later, after Genesis, it is a biblical concept that, if you accept it, works. For example, if you look at different biblical writings, such as those in the Deuterocanonical and the Apocryphal canons, you will see that these ideas are set up quite well, but you have to be willing to accept the broader canon. For example, in 2 Maccabees 7, it says, "I beg you, child, to look at the heavens and the earth, and see all that is in them. Then you will know that God did not make them out of existing things, and in the same way the human race came into existence." The term for earth here used in Genesis is in the feminine as well. It's important to understand these little concepts because it changes the way that we understand it in the English when you learn what the original context of this stuff was in the Hebrew. If you notice, it talked about the abyss, or Tehom in Hebrew. It is the equivalent to the Mesopotamian and Babylonian word Tamat, which is something like the deep or the sea. Tamat links Genesis to other more ancient creation tales popular around Mesopotamia, the Levant, and the Mediterranean. And when I say Mesopotamia, I mean both the near and middle. Okay, so throughout that whole area, what we would call the Middle East and the Near East. Tamat was an oceanic chaos deity, and in the Emma Elish, a Babylonian creation myth, and in the Epic of Gilgamesh, she is an important and prominent character, though in the Epic of Gilgamesh she only shows up very little. Okay, so you'll also notice that the way that creation is based is on the solar process, not on the lunar process like other ancient Middle Eastern creation myths. Again, solar, not astronomical. And the number 7, as it is beginning to be established here, was already established throughout the ancient Near East. This numerology comes from a later, distinct school of thought, separate from the rest of the Bible after Genesis. This is important in dating when Genesis was written, as it relates to the rest of the Old or Hebrew Testament. Also, the idea in Hebrew thought was that day began at sunset, not at morning. So when you hear light and dark, understand that you should not be thinking in our terms of a 12-hour day and then a 12-hour night. No, they would be thinking more 24 hours all the way around, kind of like military time, but it would start off, the day would not start off in the morning, it would start off at sunset. Okay, so just important to note. Then we get to the second day, and this is where the atmosphere is created by the separation of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the waters to separate one body of water from the other." And so it happened. Or in the King James Version, "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Or in the English Standard Version, "And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the dome, and it separated the water above the dome from the water below it. Or in the King James, "And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so." God called the dome the sky. Evening came, and morning followed, the second day. Or, in the KJV, "And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." Next comes the third day, and this is where earth and sea are brought forth, as is fruit. Fruit's important because early man is going to be surviving off fruit. Then God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into a single basin, so that the dry land may appear, And so it happened. The water under the sky was gathered into its basin, and the dry land appeared. God called the dry land the earth, and the basin of the water he called the sea. God saw how good it was. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation, every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree on earth that bears fruit with its seeds in it." And so it happened. Then the earth brought forth every kind of plant that bears seed, and every kind of fruit tree on earth that bears fruit with its seed in it. God saw how good it was. Evening came, and morning followed, the third day. Here, God functions as the priest of the world to creation, blessing, consecrating, defining order, and setting out clear boundaries. The world, or the garden, then is the Lord's temple, and the word day may be rhetorical and not bound to the human understanding of time. For us, and for the ancient Greeks, chasm, that is, nothingness, void, or vacuum, was or existed before creation, while for the ancient people, that chasm was chaos, the original God. He or she, depending on your religion, was the boundless, dark, turbulent, and violent waters that created everything. Sometimes as an accidental or stinky fart called the cosmic egg or world egg. Now in Genesis, chaos is dormant and no longer sentient, but subject to God's control and whims, banished to oblivion and non-existence with the creation of existence. Chaos is now antimatter, dark matter, that makes up reality where creation has yet to take place. That is an important difference from the stinky fart version of creation in Greek mythology, where now, and even in some other societies where there's a world egg, and sometimes even a world turtle. This is completely different than that. Now, creation itself is subject to a greater God. The fourth day, the creation of the stars, sun, moon, and time. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate day from night. Let them mark the fixed times, the days and the years." In the KJV, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night." And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and serve as luminaries in the dome of the sky to shed light upon the earth." And so it happened. God made the two great lights, the greater one to govern the day and the lesser one to govern the night. And he made the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to shed light upon the earth, or in the King James, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw how good it was. Evening came and morning followed, the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with an abundance of living creatures, and on the earth let birds fly beneath the dome of the sky." And so it happened. God created the great sea monsters and all kinds of swimming creatures with which the water teems, and all kinds of winged birds. God saw how good it was. Or in the Jewish Publishing Society's version, God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. If we go to Psalms, we can see a different take on this. From Psalms 74, verses 12 through 17. "Yet you, God, are my king from of old, winning victories throughout the earth. You stirred up the sea by your might. You smashed the heads of the dragons on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan, tossed him for food to the sharks. You opened up springs and torrents, brought dry land out of the primeval waters. Yours the day and yours the night. You set the moon and sun in place. You fixed all the limits of the earth. Summer and winter you made. From Psalms 104, verses 25 through 26. Look at the sea, great and wide. It teems with countless beings, living things both large and small. Here ships ply their course. Here Leviathan, your creature, plays. Then from Job, chapter 26, verses 5 through 14. The shades beneath writhe in terror, the waters and their inhabitants. Naked before him is the netherworld, and abandoned, has no covering. He stretches out the north over empty space, and suspends the earth over nothing at all. He binds up the waters in his clouds, yet the cloud is not rent by their weight. He holds back the appearance of the full moon by spreading his clouds before it. He has marked out a circle on the surface of the deep as the boundary of light and darkness. The pillars of the heavens tremble and are stunned at his thunderous rebuke. By his power he stirs up the sea, and by his might he crushes Rahab. With his angry breath he scatters the waters, and he hurls the lightning against them relentlessly. His hand pierces the fugitive dragon, as from his hand he strives to flee. Lo, these are but the outlines of his ways, and how faint is the word we hear. And then again, we hear more about Leviathan in Isaiah. This is the sea monster, or the sea creatures that we hear about in the beginning of Genesis, just to remind you of why we're covering this. From Isaiah 27, verse 1. On that day, the Lord will punish with his sword that is cruel, great, and strong, Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the coiled serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Now we continue on. And God blessed them, saying, Be fertile, multiply, and fill the water of the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth. Evening came, and morning followed, the fifth day. It is important to note that the creation of the primordial light back during the first day came before the creation of the luminaries. And the expanse that was mentioned is a forging, blacksmithing, and metalworking term that refers to metal that has been hammered out flat. This passage on the fifth day is a polemic against sun and moon worship, saying that our Lord is an all-powerful God, not simply a limited divine being. Then we get to the sixth day, which is the creation of land animals and man. So the dominions given to man, everything's said to be good, and animals and man are told to be fruitful and multiply. And God said, Let the earth bring forth all kinds of living creatures, cattle, creeping things, and wild animals of all kinds. And so it happened. God made all kinds of wild animals, all kinds of cattle, and all kinds of creeping things of the earth. God saw how good it was. Then God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the cattle, and over all the wild animals, and all the creatures that crawl on the ground. God created man in his image, in the divine image. He created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, saying, Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth. God also said, See, I give you every seed-bearing plant all over the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit on it to be your food. And to all the animals of the land, and all the birds of the air, and all the living creatures that crawl on the ground. I give all the green plants for food, and so it happened. God looked at everything he had made, and he found it very good. Evening came, and morning followed, the sixth day. Okay. The question always comes up when reading this. Who is God talking to? There are many answers. Some say it is Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Some say angels. Some say that it is other divinities, the so-called minor divinities, such as the abstracts like wisdom, Sophia. But the Bible itself gives an answer. From 1 Kings chapter 22, 19. Micaiah continued, "Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord seated on his throne, with the whole host of heaven standing by, to his right and to his left." From Isaiah 6, verses 1 and 2. In the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, with the train of his garment filling the temple. Seraphim were stationed above. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 they veiled their faces. With 2 they veiled their feet. And with 2 they hovered aloft. From Job 1, verse 6. One day, when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, Satan also came among them. Yet, even if you go with the Christian understanding of this being a subtle reference to the Trinity, the use of us and our pronouns is done in the singular, showing the one undivided nature of God in his unity. Other than just talking about the possibility of referencing the Trinity, it is also important to note that mankind, that is, human beings, are made in the image and likeness of God. This is a basis for universal human rights, saying that we each and all have intrinsic value. Likeness and image could refer to reason and intellect, the rational mind or the rational soul, the Greek psyche. Also, realize that both man and woman are made in the image and likeness of God. All people are individuals here, each a king and a queen, yet they are also limited and subject to the greater power of God, and later, after the fall, to mortal nature. Yet that does not mean that even in our ideal state, that we are free from critique, temptation, doubt, death, or pain, as all these are mentioned before mankind's fall from grace. Here, very good is part of human nature as declared by God, but free will is also part of that condition, as we must choose to be good, a state that we can deny, ignore, or even waste. The question of sustenance is also one that comes up when telling the story. The question quickly comes, which is our idyllic nature? What is our idyllic nature? Are we supposed to be fruitarians, vegetarians, or omnivores? The ideal then is to live without violence of any kind and to eat fruits and plants rather than to kill any type of sentient life, be it simple or complex. It is also interesting to note that God grants sexuality before the fall, as he grants the animals and the humans the command to fill the earth. But he also gives a second divine command only to mankind, and that is to subdue it. There's another thing that I sometimes wonder here, which is what about the animals? When did they become male and female in this story? Was it before or after the dichotomy was set up in humans? All right, that's going to be it for now. That should be exactly roughly 30 minutes, give or take some editing. And next we'll do chapter 2. I hope this was a better version, and if you guys like this more, I will start doing my later videos after I get done redoing the first 3 chapters of Genesis and reading the relevant verses from the Emma Elish and from Theogony and Working Days. If you guys like this, I will start incorporating this style into my videos going forward. Peace, like, and subscribe, and let's see some likes, people. Come on. Peace.